Right, so I'd like to introduce Kate, who's from Buglife, and she is the project officer for the Pollinators Along The Tweed project. So I'll just turn the lights down. Take it away.
Cool. So hello everyone, I'm Kate. I'm here from Buglife and I've just taken over Pollinators Along The Tweed. So I've just been in post for about 6 weeks now, so I'm still pretty new to the project. So I'll give you a brief overview on Buglife, pollinators, what we've been working on so far, and what my plans are going forward with the project. So, a bit of background on Buglife first. So, as the name suggests, we are an invertebrate conservation charity, and we're actually the only organisation in Europe that's concerned with the protection of all invertebrates. So we work terrestrial, freshwater, and marine. And our aim is to halt invertebrate extinctions and achieve sustainable populations of invertebrates in the UK. And in doing so, we hope to save the small things that run the planet. So yeah, brief overview of us. So one of the primary groups Buglife is focused on conserving are pollinators, but just brief background on pollinators for those that don't know as much. So what exactly is a pollinator? So by definition, a pollinator is any flower visiting animal which transfers pollen from one flower to another, thus facilitating fertilization of the flower. So there's actually a huge amount of animals worldwide that meet this definition. There's about 350,000 different species of pollinator, and that includes both invertebrates and also some vertebrate pollinator species as well. So why do these animals visit flowers? What's in it for them? So like us, bees, for example, need to eat, so the primary reason they visit flowers is to obtain nectar. So nectar is a sugar-rich liquid of major carbohydrate. It's essentially what gives bees their energy to forage, to build nests, carry out all their daily activities. And nectar is actually produced by flowers to both reward pollinators for visiting and to encourage them to continue visiting. So the second reason they visit flowers is to obtain pollen. So pollen is a source of protein and nutrients, and it's also what bees use to feed their larvae. So what bees will do is collect the pollen, bring it back to their nest, and then when the young bees or larvae emerge, there is a food source high in nutrients and protein waiting for them. So, unique pollinators. So, as I mentioned, so we get to have both vertebrate and invertebrate pollinator groups. So in some tropical ecosystems, you'll actually get birds and lizards playing a huge role in pollination. But in the UK, we have some birds pollinate, so blue tits visit flowers, and in visiting flowers will consume pollen and will transfer between flowers, so it could be considered pollinators. But most pollination in the UK is carried out by 4 main invertebrate groups. So first up we have the Hymenoptera. So pictured here we have our buff-tailed bumblebee. Hymenoptera is composed of bees, wasps and ants. We also have Diptera, so these are our flies. Pictured here we have the marmalade hoverfly. We have Lepidoptera, these are all our butterflies and moths. And then we also have Coleoptera, or beetles, which are often forgotten about as pollinators, but are still quite significant pollinators in the UK. And then pictured here is the common pollen beetle. So, when we think of pollinators, I think the first one that comes to mind for most of us is bees. More specifically, I think we think of honeybees. But in the UK, we actually have a huge diversity of bees. So we actually have 270 plus species of bee in the UK, and they're, very diverse groups. Yeah, it's amazing. I think we forget how much we have. So we have the honeybee, which I think we're all pretty familiar with. We have bumblebees. So this is the garden bumblebee. We have species such as, this is the hairy-footed flower bee. I don't know if you can quite tell this picture, but they have really hairy legs, which is what gives them their name. We have species such as this. This is the common furrow bee, or it's a Lasioglossum bee. This is actually the largest bee genera worldwide. So there's 1,800 species of these globally. We have about 32 in the UK. We have species such as the Andrena or the mining bees. So this is the chocolate mining bee, or Andrena scotia. And then we also have species such as this, which is the nomad bee. It looks quite wasp-like, but it is a bee. And this is actually a nest parasite of the bee next to it. So it parasitizes their nests. So, a bit more detail of each. I'll break it down a little bit. So first up we have our honeybees. We have one species of honeybee in the UK, so it's pretty straightforward. It's Apis mellifera. These are not actually wild bees. These are all domesticated. So you'll usually find them in hives managed by people. You can get wild colonies, so colonies that have escaped hives, nesting in dead wood, old trees, but we'd consider these feral rather than wild bees. We'd still consider them a domesticated species. As the name suggests, they're the only species that make honey. You typically will get a queen and thousands of workers in nests, and they're the only bee species that have hairy eyes. I don't know if you can quite tell that, but if you see a bee with hairy eyes, you're looking at it from bees. So next up we have our bumblebees. So again, we've got 24 species in the UK, quite diverse. These are generally large and covered in dense hair. They're typically a social species, so normally you'll get a nest with a couple of hundred workers or so. You most often get them nesting in underground, usually in old vegetation, dense vegetation, grass tussocks, or rodent burrows, or where birds have nested before. And of the 24 species, 6 of these are cuckoo species. So these are actually nest parasites of other bumblebees. They have quite interesting lifespans. So they have no worker bees. What happens is the females will emerge at the end of their hibernation. They'll forage like other bee species, so they'll act as pollinators. And then they'll time their invasion quite quickly. So what they do is they can't invade their host species too soon, or the host species won't have produced enough worker bees yet. But if they invade too late, there'll be too many worker bees, so they'll just be fought off. So they have quite an interesting life cycle. This is actually a cuckoo bee. This is Bombus barbitellus, and this is a cuckoo species of the garden bumblebee, I believe. And what you'll usually find is they look quite similar to their host species, just so they can sneak into the nest a little bit easier, I think. Then we have our sultry bees. So this is where most of our bee diversity is. We've got 250 species in the UK. I think putting them all together is almost a bit of a disservice to them, because there's 24 different genera of sultry bees. So you have groups such as the mining bees, leafcutter bees, mason bees, plaster bees, most of which will get their names from their nesting habits. So the plaster bee, for example, they produce like cellophane-like resin, and that's what they use to line their nest with. The leafcutter females will have these massive jaws on them, so they'll actually cut up leaves, and they'll use those to line and seal off their nests as well. They are, as the name would suggest again, you'll only get one female per nest. They often, the mining bees especially, will nest in quite large aggregations, so it gives the appearance almost of a hive. You'll see a lot of them coming and going, but it is just one female per nest. Females also work alone. They do everything for the sultry bees, so they'll go, they'll get their nest, they'll provision it with pollen, they'll set up the young bees, they'll lay their eggs, and they'll leave. They're a very diverse group. So they're typically smaller than bumblebees and honeybees, but they vary greatly in their appearance, behaviour, nesting habits, food preferences, habitat requirements. You get some that have very specific relationships with plants. So there's one species, it's a macropus species, it's the yellow loosestrife bee. I don't know if anyone's heard of it, but that has a particular relationship with yellow loosestrife. So what it does is it actually obtains the floral oils from the plant, and it usually will nest in damp soils. So it uses the floral oil to waterproof its nest, so that the larvae can stay dry. And they're up to some really cool nesting habits. So pictured here is another mining bee at the top. This is the tawny mining bee, and at the bottom we have a mason bee. And that's the blue mason bee. Yeah. And then onto our wasps. So we have 9,000 species of wasps in the UK. And you get social, solitary, and parasitic species. So pictured here, very beautiful. It's the ruby-tailed wasp. Has quite a gruesome life cycle as well, despite its quite pretty appearance. So they're a nest parasite of the mason bee. But what they'll do is actually lay their eggs, and their young will eat the developing mason bees when they emerge. So that's really the key difference between wasps and bees, is that wasps will usually feed their larvae live animals. So they typically will capture, sting, paralyze their prey, and then feed that to their larvae. But then as adults, we have about 2,500 plus species which still feed on pollen and nectar, so we would still consider these as pollinators as well. Then coming up next we have our flies. So we have about 7,000 species of fly in the UK, of which at least 1,500 are pollinators. Of these flies, hoverflies are probably the most significant pollinators. We've got about 283 species of hoverfly in the UK, of which 270 are pollinators, so the majority of these are pollinators. Pictured here is the marmalade hoverfly. This is the most common hoverfly species. As you can see, it's quite similar in appearance to a lot of bees and wasps. It's got kind of similar yellow and or orangey and black banding. But how you recognise this species is you can see it's got these two moustache-shaped bands on its abdomen. So that's how you can recognise the marmalade hoverfly. And then we have butterflies and moths. I think we're all pretty familiar with our butterflies and moths. They're quite a pretty group. So we have 57 resident species of butterfly in the UK, and then we get 2 that are regular migrants. Pictured here with the butterflies is the marsh fritillary. And then we have moths. We've got about 2,500 species of moths. Most of these are micro moths, so quite small species. This is a macro moth picture. This is a cinnabar moth. And of the moths, about 1,500 are pollinators. I think we forget how significant pollinators moths are, mostly because they're night flying, just so we're not as familiar with seeing them. But they are very significant pollinators here. And as well, they're not just significant pollinators, they also underpin a lot of our terrestrial ecosystems. So for example, blue tits in the UK and Ireland eat an estimated 50 billion moth caterpillars each year. So without a lot of these pollinators, we wouldn't have our flowers, but we also wouldn't have the garden birds that we love and like to see in our gardens. And then the last pollinator group I'll go through are the beetles. So you've got 4,000 species of beetle in the UK. This includes terrestrial and freshwater species, of which about 250 are pollinators. So some of these are exclusively pollinators, so some like the pollen beetle, pictured here, is the thick-legged flower beetle. They'll feed exclusively on pollen. The species is recognisable by, you can see it's got quite thick back legs, that's on the males. The females don't have quite as big back legs. But then some species as well will just supplement their diet with pollen. So some ladybird species will mainly eat aphids, but every now and again will have a little pollen snack, if you will. And actually beetles are probably the oldest pollinators on Earth. So we think they've been pollinating for about 99 million years, which is quite impressive. Despite this, they're still not the most efficient pollinators. So obviously they're not as hairy as bees, so they just don't pick up as much pollen on their body when they visit flowers. But as well as that, they're quite hungry, so they tend to eat a lot more pollen than any other groups. So what you'll often find is that beetle pollinated flowers will just produce extra pollen, just so there's enough left over after the beetles eat to be passed on to the next flower. So, we now know what some of our pollinator groups are, but why should we care about them? So, in order for plants to produce the fruits, nuts and seeds which we love to eat and which enable them to grow new seedlings and spread to new areas, they first must be pollinated and fertilized. So, about 87.5% of flowers globally, or flowering plants globally, depend on insect pollination. This is just so flowering plants. In terms of crops, about 75% of the 115 most productive crop plants are to some extent dependent on animal pollinators, and these crops account for 35% of the worldwide crop yield. So you'll often hear people say that about 1 in 3 mouthfuls we eat is insect pollinated. It's not quite as simple as that, but about 35% of worldwide crop yield is dependent on pollinators. So when we say dependent to some extent, it's quite a spectrum. So there's some species that are entirely dependent on insect pollination, so cannot produce anything without insect pollination. So coffee and chocolate, for example, not fully dependent, but highly dependent on insect pollination. Then you've got some other species that can develop fruit without insect pollination, but usually will develop much better and much more fruit if they are insect pollinated. So it does still have an impact on the market and what the plants can produce. And as well, something we often forget about in terms of animal pollination is that actually a lot of what we feed our livestock comes from animal pollinated crops. So if it weren't for pollination, a lot of our meat, dairy, eggs would actually be much more difficult to produce and much more expensive to buy, just because we feed our animals a lot of insect pollinated foods. Then in terms of monetary or economic values, in the UK, pollinators contribute approximately £603 million in the economy each year just through their pollination of crops. So they have massive significance in our lives. Despite this significance, pollinators are unfortunately experiencing declines, both in the UK but quite broadly worldwide. So, recent UK research looked at 353 different species of wild bee and hoverfly, found that about 1/3 of the studied species had experienced declines in their distribution since 1980. So that same study determined that the average geographic range of bees and hoverflies declined by about 1/4. In terms of moths and butterflies, so long-term trends suggest that about 80% of butterfly species have decreased either in abundance, distribution, or both since the 1970s. And in terms of moths, it's massive. In terms of moths, there's been about 51 moth extinctions in the UK, so species just completely gone now. There's a number of reasons why this is happening. So I'll run through the most significant ones. So first up is pesticide use. So use of pesticides and herbicides in agriculture or horticulture often have far-reaching consequences beyond just the species that they're targeted to impact. So Buglife, we have a very strict no glyphosate policy, so we do not use glyphosate on any of our sites. None of our meadows are put in glyphosate, and we've completely banned it from the company. We also have a lot of the neonicotinoid pesticides that have quite significant effects. They have effects on freshwater invertebrates, on pollinators, even on birds. So this is, a large reason why we're experiencing declines. Introduction of alien invasive species, also quite significant. And can often have quite unusual and complicated effects. So some are quite straightforward. So there's species such as the Asian hornet, which just eats up pollinators. Very simple. You experience declines. Then you can have more complicated interactions. So this, I know along the Tweed and around here there's a lot of Himalayan balsam, which bees actually love. So you would think initially it's a good thing that you have this species. But what ends up happening is that our native wildflowers get outcompeted because the pollinators will just visit Himalayan balsam. So then we'll lose the native wildflowers. And then if there is any specific relationships, like say for example with the yellow loosestrife bee, if that's outcompeted by something like Himalayan balsam, then you start to lose the species with quite specific interactions and quite specific life history needs. So climate change, pretty obvious, that's obviously impacting our pollinators. So what can happen with climate changes, with changing weather patterns? Flowers can emerge either earlier or later than they typically would in a year, and if bees don't match that, they'll become decoupled from their flowers that they need. So when they emerge, the flowers will be gone, or they won't have arrived yet, and they simply won't have access to them. Climate change can also cause say excessive heat or excessive cold, which will make insects need to move. So insects will be trying to move around the place more, and if there's not habitat to facilitate this move, they'll simply be lost. And then also playing a role, we have diseases and parasites. So what is sometimes the case is from commercially reared honeybees that have either escaped or been released, they'll carry mites, they'll carry disease, and this can spread to our wild pollinator populations, and they can be impacted in this way. But what's definitely the most significant cause is just habitat loss. So the loss and degradation of habitats is having huge impacts on pollinators. And we're losing massive amounts of wildflower meadows. So in England alone, they've lost 97% of wildflower-rich habitat since the 1930s. And this equates to about 3 million hectares, which is roughly the size of Wales, I believe. That's been lost just in England. And the loss of habitat like that is not just significant because the habitat's gone, but the habitat that remains tends to be quite fragmented and quite isolated. So bees cannot move, or pollinators I should say, cannot move through the landscape. So what happens then is you can have inbreeding and you can have genetic effects on populations if they just have nowhere else to go. But there are some solutions to this decline, it's not all bad news. So the number, as habitat loss is the most significant factor affecting bees. The number one thing we should be focusing on when it comes to pollinator declines is the provision of habitat. So we need to protect, restore, and create suitable habitat. So to do this, what we really need to consider, first of all, is what do pollinators need? So the number one thing they need from the habitat is food, but they need food both as adults and as larvae. So for adults, quite a simple thing to do a lot of time is to put in a wildflower meadow. With a nice variety of species, you'll tend to appeal to most pollinators, and they can feed as adults. But there's some species that have, again, quite specific relationships with plants, so you'll need to consider these if you want to target specific species. So one that's quite common is the cinnabar moth. So with caterpillars, with herbivorous caterpillars, they tend to be generalist or specialist feeders. So the generalist feeders, you can kind of put in any kind of plants and they'll tend to be happy with it. But the specialist species, they'll typically eat one species of flower or a closely related group of flowers. So the cinnabar moth, quite popular, I think we all look forward to seeing it every summer. That obviously depends on roundwork as a caterpillar. So if you're looking to conserve species like this, it's important to consider what are the specific needs of the species. And then the number 2 thing we need to think about when providing suitable habitat is nesting sites. So bees and pollinators, they need spaces to overwinter, they need spaces to rear their young, and they again have different needs in this. So things like bumblebees, they tend to nest in grass tussocks and vegetation, in burrows. So what we tend to recommend with meadows is if you have a meadow or you look after a meadow, is if you leave one strip unmown each year and you leave the vegetation along in one strip, you can provide overwintering habitat, and then if you rotate that strip each year, you keep the whole area as a meadow, but you still can cater to the overwintering species. And then for species such as the mining bees, you can put in sand, kind of bare soil areas, so they tend to like warm, sunny, south-facing slopes that are bare soil. So these are all things to consider when putting in wildflower habitats. However, even where habitats remain and where we tend to put them in, they often can be quite isolated. So what Buglife have brought in are beelines. This is our big pollinator project. So we can call these as like insect superhighways is kind of the tagline for them. So what they are a series of essentially insect pathways. They're mapped here, so this is the beelines map of Scotland. And these we imagine as like weaving through our countryside, weaving through our towns, and providing a series of wildflower-rich habitat stepping stones. So you can see from the map, it's a landscape scale approach, so we're tackling the whole of the UK. This is just Scotland mapped, but we have beelines mapped for all of England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And what we're hoping to do is to link existing wildflower areas together and create a network, kind of like what we would use as a road or a rail network, to enable pollinator species to move through the habitat and to access sites and move between them. This map at the minute, however, these are not all insect superhighways, so this is what we envision where we would put them. The great thing about beelines is we encourage everyone to get involved. So if you find you live along a beeline, we encourage everyone to put as small a patch as you can or as big a patch as you can into your garden, and you can add it to our beelines map. It's a very collaborative project. This is all available on our website, and link it if anyone's interested. And you can look and you can zoom in and you can see if you're on the map and you can see projects that have been added to date. We also have a whole load of resources on wildflower meadows, on pollinators, all that kind of stuff on the Buglife website, so it's quite good. So that's that. So, more specifically, the project I'm currently running is Pollinators Along The Tweed. It's quite a mouthful, so we tend to call it PAT for short. And this is one of our big beelines projects. So it's a Buglife-led project, but it's part of the broader Destination Tweed program. And for those of you who don't know or haven't heard of Destination Tweed, what we're aiming to do is to celebrate and share the nature, history, and stories of the River Tweed. And this is being done in a number of different ways. So we have a range of river, landscape, and cultural projects. So we have a riparian woodland project, we have an invasive species removal project, we have an education project, we have some arts and cultural projects. There's 13 altogether, of which Pollinators Along The Tweed is just one. So it's a really cool ongoing project, and all of these are anchored on the creation of a 113-mile long source-to-sea trail along the River Tweed. So it should be quite good when it's all completed. So how does Pollinators Along The Tweed fit into this? So Pollinators Along The Tweed focuses on reversing pollinator decline along the River Tweed, and this has been possible due to a number of funders. I think this is all of our funders at the minute. Excuse me if I've forgotten anyone. We have National Lottery Heritage Fund, Nature Scott, Scottish Power, the Charitable Trust, Milky Bar, we've got the Palago Environmental Fund, Relative Green Living Water, and the Craiganish Trust. So what we're hoping to do is essentially to reverse the decline of pollinator species, and there's two key ways in which we're tackling this problem at Pollinators Along The Tweed. So the number one thing is to increase habitat. So we're hoping to increase and connect the area of wildflower-rich habitat for pollinating insects along the River Tweed beeline. What that means in numbers is we're hoping to directly put in 40 hectares of wildflower-rich habitat across 50 sites. And then through the provision of workshops and through giving management advice and that kind of thing, we're hoping to indirectly enhance another 40 hectares of wildflower meadow. So quite an ambitious project. And then the second key priority is to really engage communities along the Tweed in the wildflower meadows. So to the vision of pollinator themed events, so we're doing citizen science surveys, we do workshops, we do talks obviously. We're hoping that communities along the Tweed can discover and learn more about the Tweed's pollinators and how to monitor and protect them. We really want everyone to get involved and to feel a sense of ownership of the meadows and feel like they can really play a part in this. So we're working with a number of key partners to complete this. We're working with the Scottish Borders Council, Tweedsmuir, Norham, People's Golf Course, Finnish Heritage, with Greener Melrose, some of you are here today. We've got the Borders Forest Trust, Chapter House, Historic Environment Scotland, and we're adding new partners all the time. If anyone knows of anyone who'd like to get involved, please let me know. It's quite an ongoing, we're building on it all the time. So we're running from November 2022 to May 2027, so we're just about a year and a half in now. We still have about 4 years left to go. So, how it's been going so far for us. So this is what was accomplished in 2023. We properly just kicked off the habitat enhancements then. So I've mapped all the sites here in which enhancements have currently occurred. They're all mapped here along the River Tweed. So we've had some Norham, Coldstream, we've had Dry Grange, we've had Wasserburn, Innerleithen, Peebles, Tweedsmuir and Moffat. So across these 10 sites we've put in approximately 7 hectares of wildfire meadow so far. And when we say habitat enhancements, it can really include a number of different things. So what we typically will do is we'll go out, we'll visit the site, we'll assess what's currently there, and then we'll come up with a plan for the site. So for sites that have been previously subjected to quite intensive management, they'll typically have very poor species diversity. You're looking at just like grass, usually just perennial ryegrass. So what we generally recommend for these sites is to just completely strip it, to harrow the earth, and then to put in a wildfire seed mix. So pictured here we have some volunteers putting in wildfire seed mix. All of our wildfire seed mixes are all locally sourced, and we mostly get them from Scotland, and we get some from Cumbria. We work with some local farmers to ensure we have a local provenance of seeds. And then we'll also put in bulbs, we'll put in plug plants, we'll put in shrubs, we'll put in fruit trees. We'll tend to go for this kind of approach in sites either where it's not appropriate or it's not permission to completely take up all the grass. It can be not the prettiest short term, but. And then what we'll often do is we'll put in yellow rattle. I'm sure most of you have heard of yellow rattle. It's probably the single most significant wildfire species when it comes to putting in a wildfire meadow. We usually call it the meadow maker or nature's lawnmower. And it's a really amazing plant. It is a semi-parasite of grass. So what it'll do is it will take nutrients from grass roots, and in doing so it'll knock back grass bigger. So where you often run into problems with wildfire meadows is grass is just a very competitive species. It's very hard for wildfires to compete with grass. So if you can somewhat slow down grass's growth, you can open up the sward and allow less competitive wildfire species that otherwise would not have a chance to come through, and it's all just through adding yellow rattle seed. And then for sites that have not previously been subjected to intensive management, what we'll usually recommend is just a change in management. This usually just means reducing the mowing intensity. So picture here is the site forehead, and this is actually pre-intervention, so we haven't done anything yet to this meadow, and it already looks like this. So you can tell it's already got quite a good species diversity. So what we'll normally do is just see if we can reduce mowing intensity, and then we'll resurvey after a year. And if any key species are missing, we'll then go back in and add them in. So there were some bug species added in after this that were found to be missing in the meadow, but oftentimes it's enough just to stop mowing. And you'll get huge amounts of wildflowers that will come through. Then we carry out some more slightly unexpected habitat enhancement works, I guess you could say. So this is a bee bank that was put in at People's Golf Course. There was volunteers that I think shoveled an awful lot of sand to make this happen. So this is a really great idea for if you want to attract more of the solitary bee species, so like the mining bees. This is, wonderful for them. So this is where you'll typically find them nesting. We'll usually put them in south facing because they tend to like quite a warm nesting environment, and they'll usually be crescent shaped because that tends to trap more heat as well. And then we'll also do some invasive species removal. So we've done some invasive Himalayan balsam removal. This was done in collaboration with the Destination Tweed Invasive Species Program. And again, this is really great. Not only do you take out Himalayan balsam, which just gives more space to wildfire species, but you also reduce competition, which further facilitates more wildfire species coming through. So another great way, it's very simple. you can improve wildflower diversity. And then in terms of engagement events we've been holding, so we held 39 engagement events engaging 11 communities along the Tweed in 2023. So this is quite a broad variety of things. So we've done some talks, we've done habitat enhancement work, so we've done volunteer seeding, volunteer plug planting, volunteer invasive species removal, plug planting, all those kinds of things. We've done some citizen science surveys. So we've done surveys in collaboration with Butterfly Conservation, we've done a BioBlitz, and we do a lot of fit counts or flower insect time counts. I'll get more into them later on, but they're a citizen science method for surveying pollinators. We've done some training events, so we've done a siding workshop, we did that in collaboration with Borders Forest Trust. We have had stalls at various events, so engaging people that will be attending those. And then we also do a lot of school visits. So again, we collaborate a lot with Destination Tweed. They have an ongoing primary school education program. So we do a lot of work there as well and come up with some collaborative events. So here's an overview of what we've done. So we've done this is some surveying. These are some of our flower insect time counts. More surveying. This is at the siding workshop up at Corehead. And then we also have a bee hotel workshop. So we've done some of those kind of things as well. So, what are my plans going forward with the project? So for this year, I'm hoping to do 31 sites. All sites have yet to, most sites have yet to be approved, but this is the rough estimate for now. And across these 31 sites, I'm hoping to enhance about 6 hectares. Wildflower meadows, I have 2 of our sites that we're working on here pictured. So I'm going to need a lot of help, so if anyone's interested in volunteering, please get in touch. Yeah, lots planned for this year, so we need all the hands on deck I can get. And then, so coming up sooner, I've got a few things planned for spring. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm working on a site at Corehead, and this is in collaboration with Borders Forest Trust. So they have a wetland scrape here, you can see, and it's got this long, narrow bare soil margin. So we've got, I think, about 250 plug plants ordered for that. They're on the way at the minute, and that's going to be run as a volunteer planting day in April. I think it's April 17th we have booked in for that, if anyone's interested. And we're going to do some plastic and litter removal on site as well, so we'll tackle a few things while we're at it. And then I have one coming up in Clovenfords, as I've been discussing this week. So this one's in collaboration with the Scottish Borders Council. Got a few sections marked here in their community play fields. It's about 500 metres squared total. So they're preparing the ground for that at the minute, and we're hoping to put seeds in about the next 6 weeks is the goal right now. I'm also running a series of engagement events. So this is one of my 2 upcoming talks. I need to update the site again. I have another one coming up at the Scottish Women's Institute. The plug planting day at Corehead. We've got a fit count training workshop, so I'm running this with another member of Buglife staff, Rachel. So we're going to do a day where we train up volunteers and how to survey pollinators. We're hoping to run that on April 22nd, I believe. So if anyone's interested in that training, that'll be free. We're going to run that with Lincoln Peebles, so quite local. So you can get in contact with me again if you'd like to attend that. I'm going to do some school visits with Tweed Watch. I have a bee hotel workshop coming up. I'm going to run that with the National Trust for Scotland. We're going to do that at their Priorwood Garden site, and we're going to run that for the local school children. And then today I was at the Scottish Borders Climate Action Network. They did a Green Summit, which was really great. I think a few people here were there as well. It was, yeah, a really lovely event. It's lovely to hear everything that's going on in the Borders. It seems very active in terms of biodiversity and climate action. So that was lovely to be involved with. So, if any of this interests you, there's a few ways you can get involved. I can leave this up for a minute, or I can put it up at the end if anyone wants to take a photo. So, probably the most straightforward way is just to send me an email. That's my email. You can also follow us on X or Twitter, I don't know what you want to call it these days. So this is Buglife's Twitter, Buglife Tweed. And then we have a Pollinators Along The Tweed Buglife webpage. We are putting together a Destination Tweed webpage at the minute. That'll be up soon if anyone's interested in more of the projects ongoing there. And then another really easy way to get involved is to do some flower insect counts. So these are run by the UK Pollinators Monitoring Scheme, and they've put together this really nice, straightforward citizen science procedure that everyone can follow so that they get a really nice, robust data set out of it. So what you have to do is you just put down a 50 by 50 centimetre quadrat. We've pictured here. You can put this together in any way you want. You can do string as long as it's 50 by 50, doesn't matter. And what you do is they have 14 different target species that they're looking of flower species. So ideally, you would choose one of the 14 target. This is white dead nettle, that's pictured, that's one of the targets. But if you can't find them, they're open to any flower you have in your area. So what you do is you set out your quadrat and you count all the pollinators that land on the flowers in 10 minutes. And they've broken it down into broad groups so everyone involved. It's just honeybees, bumblebees, flies, beetles. You don't need to get anything to species level. All they ask is that you do it, you can do it from April to September. You have to have warm, dry weather. So I think it's above 13 degrees out if it's clear skies, and above 15, above 13 if it's clear skies, above 15 degrees if it's cloudy skies out. And they have a website where you can submit all your data, and they're just looking at UK-wide changes in pollinators across the UK. And then I have the upcoming workshop. So if you want a day where you can get someone to work through you and learn how to do it, that'll be coming up in April. So that's mostly my talk.